we celebrate the great progress that we have made as a people and as a nation in building a democracy that is founded on equal human rights for all.
Live from the SABC's Auckland Park studios, welcome to this Human Rights Day episode of The Watchdog. My name is Vuyo Mvogo, and in a moment, I'll be speaking to the acting CEO of the SA Human Rights Commission, the Chapter 9 institution established to promote respect for, observance of, and protection of human rights for everyone, without fear or favor. On our panel this evening, our panel is made up of activists from a broad spectrum of organizations that take up human rights issues. The Watchdog starts now. South Africans should celebrate the progress that has been made in building a democracy that is founded on equal human rights for all. That's according to President Cyril Ramaphosa. He was delivering a keynote address at the official Human Rights Day commemoration event in DR in the Northern Cape.
We cannot claim to be a country that respects human rights if we do not do everything in our power and within our resources to ensure that all South Africans have access to land, to housing, to food, to water, to healthcare, and to education. As a nation, we cannot claim to respect human rights if we do not do everything we can to ensure that all people have access to work, economic opportunity, and to live lives that are comfortable, that are safe and secure. There can be no doubt that we have achieved much in securing the rights of all South Africans, but we know from daily experience that we still need to do much more. On this Human Rights Day, I would like us to affirm our determination to make sure that, yes, we do realize these rights for all South Africans, so that no one is left behind. In doing so, we will give effect to the promise of our democratic constitution, and we will be paying the greatest tribute to the visionary leaders like Nelson Mandela, like Umama Albertina Sisulu, Helen Joseph, Osol Plaatje, who were the first to advocate for the respect of a Bill of Rights in our country.
President Cyril Ramaphosa there speaking in DR, where the official commemorative event for Human Rights Day was, of course, held. Several other people attended there, including the Minister of Justice and Constitutional Development, the Premier of that province, as well as several other guests, including the chairperson of the South African Human Rights Commission. And I do have on the line Eric Mokonyane, who is the acting CEO of the South African Human Rights Commission, the Chapter 9 institution that has been established to promote respect for, observance of, and protection of human rights for everyone without fear or favor. Mr. Mokonyane, good evening. Thanks very much for your time.
Good evening, Vuyo. Good evening to your viewers. I hope you can hear me.
Yes, I can hear you. Well, we have lots to be proud of and to celebrate on this day, says the President.
That is so, Vuyo, but we still have quite a number of challenges in the country on the human rights front, because until everyone situation is improved so much that they are able to join in the celebrations, we cannot be celebrating as a country.
But I mean, President himself was talking there about access to food. There are so many of our compatriots who leave, who go to bed hungry. There are so many without shelter. There are so many who, to take words from that clip we've just played, aren't living the comfortable lives that the president himself said they deserve.
Indeed, Vuyo, and I think this is a huge challenge to all of us as a country, but most importantly to government, because the Constitution is very clear on the obligations on government in terms of ensuring that rights enshrined in the Constitution are protected, promoted, and realized by everyone in the country. No one should be left behind, because this democracy would be meaningless to those who are still not able to enjoy the rights which are enshrined in the Constitution.
Last week we had a report from the Health Ombudsman on what happened, or what had been happening at the at a public hospital that is supposed to take care of mothers and their children. What the Ombudsman found to have happened at Rahima Musa hospital. These are the horrific events, that came out of that report, where workers there were raped right on the premises of that hospital, where pregnant mothers were lying on the floor. These are not things that should be happening, not in a democracy like ours, not with the kinds of resources that we have, the huge amounts of money we spend on a whole host of things.
Much more resources, Vuyo, unfortunately being spent, and by that I mean not being spent for what they've been allocated for. The level of corruption in the country is frightening. One can only imagine the progress we would have made in terms of utilizing the allocated resources for what they're meant for, had it not been, or if it was not for the level of corruption and maladministration we are encountering in the country, especially at the level of government, and more importantly at the level of local government. We all know that most, if not all, of our municipalities have collapsed in terms of service delivery. So it is really disheartening, and we're just hoping that we can have a different look and understanding and appreciation of what the Constitution enjoins us, all of us, to do in terms of ensuring that rights in the Constitution are realized.
There's a line in the president's speech where he says, and I quote, and I'm not going to quote the whole part, it says, "We cannot claim to respect human rights if we do not do everything we can to ensure that people have," and then he goes on to list the things that people should have. Can you and I say, with everything we know, with everything that we've experienced, with everything South Africans tell us on a daily basis about their suffering, their conditions, and so on, can you and I say that the government is doing everything it can to correct the wrongs and to do the things the president was talking about?
Unfortunately, no, because some of the things government could do is through the resources which I've just mentioned that are unfortunately in many instances misdirected and abused, and as a result do not end up delivering or ensuring the delivery of services which communities are expecting from government. And you know, what we say or what I say may not mean much to many people who are not facing these challenges. But if you throw the same question to a person who has been living without water for weeks and months, or who has been living in a yard full of sewer, or who has not been able to have their child or children in school for whatever reason, such people with those kind of experiences, or as you gave as an example, people who have been affected by the situation at Rahima Musa Hospital, they will not, or they will give the same response and say, yes, government is not doing everything it can with the resources it has to ensure that rights are realized by everyone in the country.
Now, what do we do? What do we do to ensure that 3-year-old Langalam Viki, who died in a pit latrine at Mkwangele Primary School in the Eastern Cape, how do we give that family hope, and several other families, that such things will never happen again? How do we give or instill hope in those mothers who are found lying on the floor at Rahima Musa? You know, and we can go on and on and on about some of the tragedies that should never have happened. How do we give these people hope? How do we mobilize resources, all manner of resources, to ensure that we put a stop to these kinds of things?
You know, Vuyo, I was just thinking loud before we started the interview around the unfortunate situation in the Eastern Cape of a child's body which was found in a pit latrine. And that's not the first case of that nature in the country. We have had few in the same province. We have had the Michael Komapi situation in Limpopo. And I was just wondering, with not being an expert in the field, but how is it so impossible that we would have by now not closed up all dysfunctional pit toilets in schools? In many instances, you find these toilets in schools, and these toilets are no longer being used, but they are left open. And for me, that is just unthinkable that we would allow a situation where such toilets remain open and a risk to the lives of our young ones. So, I mean, the one commitment I wish we could be getting from government as something which is going to be done immediately is to ensure that such toilets are closed and there is no risk of any child falling or being thrown into such a toilet. But I think in terms of the challenges generally in the country, I we as the Human Rights Commission are of the view that there's not been quite a fierce level of accountability. Rights are in the Constitution enshrined, there are law, there are programs from government side around ensuring that they are realized. But those who are entrusted with this responsibility of ensuring that resources are used responsibly and correctly are not being held accountable enough when that does not happen. Where resources disappear as a result of maladministration and corruption, it takes forever for such people to be held accountable, and that makes society to lose hope in the situation ever improving. But what I and as the Human Rights Commission are calling on government on is to ensure that levels of accountability are tightened and we all contribute to ensuring that rights are realized across the country.
Because, I mean, you and I can talk till the cows come home. I mean, we have our respective, responsibilities. I mean, the organization that you lead, to again quote from the intro I read earlier, you have a responsibility as an organization to promote respect for, observance of, and protection of human rights for everyone without fear or favor. The organization I'm part of, that's responsible for the platform you and I are using right now, has a responsibility to precisely ensure that there are fierce levels of accountability, to quote your words. How do we then exercise our respective responsibilities to make sure that those who are entrusted with those specific responsibilities you mentioned are indeed held accountable, and the people of South Africa, especially those who are most vulnerable, don't lose hope?
One of the things we should continue to do fearlessly is exactly what you and I are doing now. Be vocal about these issues in our respective responsibilities, ensure that we encourage and mobilize active citizenry in the country. Make sure that people are informed, they do exercise their rights, they hold everyone accountable, including ourselves, our respective responsibilities, so that we are effective in our endeavor to ensure that what is contained in the Constitution becomes a reality. It is everyone's business to contribute to this project of our democracy and ensuring that rights such as this, days such as this are not in vain. They are commemorated, we continue to commemorate them, but we commemorate them with some element of value of having them. Those heroes and heroines who sacrificed their lives and sweats to ensure that we ultimately enjoy this democracy and rights, did so with the hope that the lives of ordinary people would have better improved by now. And with the situation the country is in now, I do not think it is as encouraging as it should have been, and I'm only hoping that we can do better and ensure that all of us, the government, the private sector, the citizenry, all contribute towards ensuring that we have a better South Africa going forward.
Eric Mokonyane, thanks very much for your time. He is the CEO, acting CEO of the South African Human Rights Commission. After the break, reflections from a panel made up of activists from a broad spectrum of organizations that take up human rights issues.
One of the defining features of the Bill of Rights contained in our Constitution is the inclusion of social and economic rights. In addition to the right to life, equality, and human dignity, our Constitution also says that everyone has the right to housing, to health care, to food, to water, to social security, and to education. The Constitution says the state must take reasonable measures within its available resources to achieve the progressive realization of each of these rights. So it is therefore about the state, the government, always taking steps to make sure that these rights are realized. The Bill of Rights also guarantees the right to property and says the state must work to ensure that citizens have equitable access to land. This property clause makes provision for land reform, for land restitution, and security of tenure to redress the results of past racial discrimination.
Well, joining me in studio for more reflections is Andrew Dube, CEO of the Africa Disability Alliance and also a member of the Presidential Working Group on Disability. Sarah Mota is from the Action Support Center, an implementing partner for EU and UNICEF programs. On the line, we have Tato Mputi, founding director of Enabled Enlightenment, a space that seeks to educate, inform, and sensitize on issues of disability. Good evening to all of you. Thanks very much for your time.
Good evening.
Good evening, William. Good evening.
If I may start with you, Tato, lots to celebrate? Yes or no?
No, because the reality of young Black people with disabilities is that we are still marginalized. When we look at our economic activities and how we participate in the economic activities, we still find that persons with disabilities are only making 1.3% of people who are employed. You know, we still struggle with access to education. There are multiple, like our struggles are layered, and we are not where we should be by now, and it really is disappointing.
Well, Andrew, I mean, this is a conversation I want us to have last week when the Presidential Working Group had the meeting. And looking at the speech that the president gave at that meeting, it looked to me like on his own account, very little has actually been done to deal with the needs of people living with disabilities.
Yeah, we have to say very little has been done. If you are talking about policies and strategies, we have a lot of paperwork, but not much of that has been implemented on the ground. I think you are referring to our Presidential Working Group meeting, and an important part of that was to remind the President that we are waiting for the Disability Act, which would then ensure that persons with disabilities are able to enforce their rights. So at the moment, no, we are still far away.
But is he, and of course the people next to him, are they alive to the fact that they are not moving? Are they alive to the fact that they are not giving people hope? You know, that whether it's the pace at which things move or whether it's them being, I mean, for instance, were there any reasons given as to why the act is not, the law still hasn't been enacted?
Yes, well, the thing that we're told is that making laws normally takes some time. And if you are,
don't have to.
if you are making laws for a diverse range of people, then that might also bring in its own challenges. But however, you say, is he alive to the problems that we are facing? I think there's been a lot of research, studies that have been done here, which highlight the plight of people with disabilities in the country. And if we wanted to react to that, then we could have reacted to that. But I have to say that the reaction was very slow, and it's at the moment we don't have anything that we can celebrate.
So, I mean, you get involved, I mean, as an organization, that is, all sorts of jurisdictions across the world, you know, implementing, you know, programs that are supposed to assist, help, you know, correct, and do all manner of things. How do other jurisdictions handle things like, you know, the slow pace at which, for instance, the passing of legislation, enabling legislation goes, where there seems to be no lack of will or lack of urgency in addressing issues?
Well, it's a norm in most governments that the vulnerable get to be forgotten. Then it comes to the work that civil society then does at a grassroots level to mobilize for action, to mobilize for voice, to mobilize for activation of the political will that seem to be missing for most of the vulnerable groups. You asking if there is a precedent in this. We know that in other countries, for example, when we talk about gender-based violence, other countries already, especially in the SADC, just by way of example, had already had national strategic plans on gender-based violence, and South Africa was lagging behind. So what it tells us that sometimes there is other countries that are sort of in the forefront, but others then tend to be lagging or dragging their feet. Could be other reasons that their interests are not on the vulnerable, which as people in the margins, and quite often the interest is on a vote or pushing a specific political agenda.
I mean, what sort of levers do people in other jurisdictions use, that's at their disposal to, get things moving, or to get, those who are entrusted with the responsibilities of doing something about the plight of others? What sort of levers do people in other jurisdictions use to actually get these people to move?
Quite often is the voice of civil society, and that then strengthens or take the lever to another gear, so that then government get to listen to whatever policy intervention that's necessary. And wherever there is not a strong civil society, then it turns out to be an issue that gets a blind eye. But also civil society quite often are in the sort of living in fear of the response that they get, and therefore have to sometimes find themselves fleeing their own countries because they are being persecuted for having a strong political voice on a particular issue facing vulnerable groups. You talk of LGBTIQ+A persons in other countries in Africa, for example, they are not allowed to express their sexual identity or sexual orientation. Hence, they find themselves fleeing for lack of support from their own governments. So it's quite difficult at this moment to say what could be the lever. But what we know historically is that a presence of a strong civil society sector does allow for some kind of solidarity and knocking and opening of those doors that quite often are difficult. But also solidarity across borders. On a particular issue, like during apartheid, we had solidarity from other countries. Similarly, on the plight of the vulnerable, including women, persons living with disability, such solidarities are quite often needed to put pressure within the system that quite often is a regional system of different governments.
Tato, I mean, what do spaces like the one you've created do to, both sensitize, people who may not be aware or who may not think that it's their place to actually fight for these rights or to agitate for those who are, so that those who are empowered, in fact, often employed, even or elected, to do these things, in fact, do the things that they're supposed to do. What do you do in a space like yours to taking into account, the experiences of people like yourself, people like Andrew?
Okay, so the work that we do includes working with young people to realize their rights, number one, and to empower them on owning their narrative and their bodily autonomy so that they then are able to advocate from a position of power and not that of being this marginalized or vulnerable person that everyone sees you as. And then there's an element of working with parents of children with disabilities, also empowering them, because we believe that if the parents have enough knowledge around disability rights, then they start having a different conversation with their children, and it also creates a strong sense of allyship, and then they are also able to advocate for the rights of their children, be it's looking at things such as equal education, access, to reproductive services for young people with disabilities, and different other things. So the work that we do mostly focuses or centers around advocacy, and also just training people without disabilities to sensitize them to say, look, we look at things such as your language, for instance, how people often say persons living with disabilities when they should be saying persons with disabilities. And this is entirely tied to how we view a disability, because when people say to you, person living with disability, already this is then aligned to the medical sense, like we would say a person living with HIV. But what we are not realizing is that disability is, or it can be imposed by society when a person has certain limitations. It can be imposed by social settings, not having enough information around issues of disabilities, without having ways of communication, psychologically, and structural barriers. Because sometimes my disability is not the reason why I can't access your building. The fact that it was built without a ramp for me to access it says a lot about the kind of people that you want to see in those kind of settings.
For those of you who get the every once in a while opportunity to sit with the man occupying the highest political office, who has the power and everything to do certain things, do you make them realize? In other words, do you feel that your voice is being heard? Is it powerful? Is it as powerful enough? And do you not feel, because sometimes for some people it can be overwhelming, sitting with a president and then they may not speak the way the president should be spoken to, in order to make him realize why they have to do the things that they are being asked to do. How's the atmosphere? Because we don't have that privilege.
Oh, no, the atmosphere is very frank.
Yeah.
And in the last meeting that we had with the president, we went through a checklist where there were yeses or nos, and in most cases there were nos. There was no progress in different sectors of society. So the people that are in the presidential working group are really top leaders in our movement, and they are activists that have come a long way with this work. And we are quite frank with the president, and the president is also frank with us, and we are able to articulate the needs of people with disability. That's our responsibility.
Yeah, because, look, this happens to everyone. I'm not targeting you. Even us as journalists.
Yes.
Once in a while, we get an opportunity to sit like this with the president. And you'll hear people saying, you're not hard enough. You're not asking the questions we are asking you. We would like you to ask on our behalf. We do not have that privilege of sitting down with him and asking him those questions.
Oh no, we don't have that kind of. We have access to the to the president, and we are able to ask all the questions that we require. However, though, we would have wanted a bit more feedback on the comments or things that would have demanded in the past. Yes, of course, we wanted the ministry to be moved from social development into the presidency, which he agreed to. And we wanted government departments to work together a little bit more, which they are trying to do. But yes, no, we don't have any sort of like barriers. We are dealing with a lot of barriers already. We don't want to create any more barriers when we meet with the president. Yeah.
Your UNICEFs and your EUs, so whenever they come and say do projects, you being the implementing agents, do they leverage on whatever power or influence they have to try and squeeze more from governments, for example, to say, hey, this is what we can do, but we think if you also come on board, we can make the circle bigger, so to speak?
Certainly, the program that we have is a collaboration between those two institutions, UNICEF, EU, and the Department of Social Development. So it was through that buy-in that we are able to implement this program, which focuses on undocumented migrants, children, psychosocial support, and sharing the guidelines on how to deal with stateless children who are migrants. So there is, the powers that they have, they are being used to sort of exert some kind of pressure in terms of government as being the duty bearer to support, the democracy in order for all the marginalized and the vulnerable to see it being, a fruitful era or period of their life.
I mean, when you work with people closely, then you get an opportunity or you get some insights into what works, what they do right, what they could do more of, or what they're doing wrong. Have you been able to put a finger on the reasons, that governments often don't do what is obvious, to many people?
We have a situation of impunity. We have good laws, as my colleague has said, but the implementation is scantily, documented, and accountability is an issue where, in an incident like the whole day we spent in Westville Village in Krugersdorp, where it was all over the media, where where women in a crew were violated, there has just after that not been any, sufficient or efficient interventions in those communities that are on a daily basis. We were shocked to learn that these violations have been systematically happening for more than 10 years until last year we all became aware. And they are not necessarily saying we don't report. They are reporting, but there's lack of accountability, and impunity is a huge problem. And we learned this through our work, in doing human rights, even during the TRC, that impunity and lack of accountability is an issue where no one wants to be responsible and take, the role or the torch as a duty bearer in this instance. So we have this culture now of just ignoring what we need to do as servants or as civil servants to serve, the indigenous people whom we're supposed to serve.
Puti, I mean, often the complaint from politicians especially is that we don't give credit where it's due. I mean, if you read or you have listened to the president's speech today, it also goes according, on those lines. Yes, there's a lot that still needs to be done. However, we've done this and this and this and this and that. But there's another argument. Other people would argue, for example, that when we settle for less, for fear of upsetting people or not. I mean, you would have heard the ESCOM chairperson last week saying we should be happy with stage 2, Being to stage 2, that's something we should commend.
Thank you, Vuyo, for that question. We cannot be celebrating a bare minimum. If people are intentional about eradicating discrimination and ensuring that persons with disabilities are included in pretty much everything, in policies, in programs, then we wouldn't be where we are today. They often talk about disability mainstreaming, but these are just things that are in policy. These are just things that are spoken about, in conferences but it is not a reality. So we cannot be celebrating something that is not fully there. Even if when you look at the National Youth Policy, for instance, it is not strictly speaking about youth with disabilities. It doesn't even touch as much, about issues of youth with disabilities. But then what is the point of us having a national youth policy that doesn't recognize our existence to that degree? I think people are really tired of the empty promises. That's why they've stopped clapping. And people are not hypocrites anymore. And it's still the same even within the disability sector, where people are just tired of the tick box exercise that government likes doing so much, and they continue to do. Vuyo, right now, if you could ask all of these departments, how many of these departments actually have people with disabilities working in them? How many people with disabilities who own businesses, who run businesses, are being supported meaningfully and not just a tick box exercise? Those are some of the uncomfortable truths that they are not willing to account for. And I think Mesara spoke about it, that there is so much avoidance, to people's lived experiences and realities, which is really upsetting, to say the least.
Do you think we're being harsh at times with politicians when we point out these things, when we appraise them and they don't come out of those processes smelling of roses? Do you think we're being unfair?
Yes, I have to say politicians have to be a little bit more accountable than they are right now. The situation that we are in can be corrected. It's not that it is entirely difficult to rectify the problems that are being faced by people with disabilities. Take, for instance, the children in inclusive education schools. There is no reason why they should be attending schools in classes that are not accessible. That's a basic thing that any government would be interested in. So it's not enough to say we are respecting the rights of people when the people don't enjoy those rights. And there are no mechanisms right now within government that can make civil servants to do as they should do. So therefore, people go back to the government, because at the end of the day, it is government that is responsible for ensuring that human rights are delivered and respected. Yeah.
There's Sarah, there's a video that the EFF sent out yesterday. Of course, this is politics being politics. These things can be quite tricky at times. But in this video, you actually see police harassing girls and women in what appears to be a rather. Let's have a look.
People have been arrested now for misbehaving. They have been arrested. Yeah. Come, go. We are check. Shoot that window there. Shoot that window.
Now, we also have no context. We don't know what actually happened, where that whole thing started. But you're saying women, being shoved around by policemen, and they don't appear to be posing any danger. And whatever they may have, they now have them, so they can just escort them to the van. And they were not showing any resistance, Now, did they have to be shoved around, Did they have to be manhandled?
Clearly, it's a question of power, and could be one of the reasons why women, in the definition of who is vulnerable, are in that category. So it's abuse of power and position where you find yourself in. Clearly, if I assume these were men, there could have been a different approach. Sure. And I might be tempted to think that there were other men in around that environment. But because of the power and the position that the police, being raised in a patriarchal, toxic environment that we are in, then sees a woman as a vulnerable, as the weaker, person of, this identity, therefore easily, be accessible in terms of, being thrown in the van. That is what we call abuse of power and not taking responsibility as, a duty bearer. You have a duty to protect as the state, and this is clearly demonstrated in this, images that you have just shown. That role for the state, has not been, observed as being somebody who is there to enforce law, but with respect and dignity for the individuals that you want to, call into book.
Mm-hmm. And that's the point, Puti. I mean, isn't it? This is the orientation, of our political leaders, but also the orientation of some public servants. Because what happened at Rahima Musa, that the reporter of the Ombud spoke to last week about mothers sleeping on floors, about hospital workers being raped on the hospital premises. I mean, if anyone cared, if people cared, if people appreciated that they have a responsibility to make sure that such things don't happen, that would happen. We are not a poor country, so it's not about money. When you look at everything else we spend our money on. University students don't have to go and protest and vandalize property in the process, or whoever then gets to take the opportunity, because of those protests. But such things shouldn't be happening.
I'm in agreement for we shouldn't even be still faced with these kind of things. And I think this is a perfect example that we have so many policies, great policies, and it is clear that they are not infiltrating the different departments. Because I believe that as a duty bearer, you have that responsibility to ensure that this person is still protected, and there was no need for the harassment, right? And tomorrow, when you want to address such issues around how police or how members of the government are treating people, then you are looked as the problematic activist or an angry activist when you are really just asking for accountability. And this is the same kind of attitude that we get towards persons with disability in different spaces where they are not patient with persons with disabilities. They have no time. I mean, as a person with a disability, accessing a basic thing, just the justice system, it's almost impossible because they don't have us in mind.
And good policies don't implement themselves.
Definitely not. I mean, if you look at almost all the policies that we have, well, first of all, the Constitution. We used to say our Constitution was the best, but many other African countries have now gone beyond the Constitution, and they've now established disability legislation, which and they don't have as much resources as we do, but they are trying to implement. You can see that there is a willingness, a political will, to ensure that the rights are enforced. And then if you look at BEE policies and legislation, although persons with disabilities and women are mentioned there, but how many of them have benefited from that policy? And as I said already, if you look at the Employment Equity Act, if you look at Department of Public Works, they set a target, 100,000 people with disabilities to be employed in the current phase of the EPWP. But so far, that target has not been achieved. It's not that there is no money or there is no planning. It's simply because there is no one who can make them accountable to ensure that they achieve those targets.
Well, there's an interesting development, and we're going to play out with that package now, where a group of political parties, but also groups of lawyers have come together to challenge the whole notion that, of electricity. That this is not a natural disaster or anything like that. Someone with the will and money should be able to do it, and we shouldn't be short on any of those things. So UDMs and, of course, lawyers like Advocate Tembeka Ngcukaitobi are taking that case on. Let's play you that package.
Advocate Tembeka Ngcukaitobi argues that the harm that load shedding is causing is irreparable. He says this case is about the human cost of load shedding, adding that the electricity crisis has immediate implications for the Bill of Rights. He told the court that load shedding has caused avoidable deaths in the health sector, intensified inequality in education, and cost the economy billions of rands. He argues that when there is load shedding at hospitals, there is damage to medical equipment and other infrastructure. The integrity of medicines that are supposed to be kept at certain temperatures is compromised, and laboratory services become dysfunctional. He says the negative impact also stretches to schools, police stations, businesses and households. The court is being asked to exempt the critical sectors of society from load shedding, either by reconfiguring the grid or by providing alternative energy whenever the primary energy source is failing.
The ultimate end point is that if you have constitutional obligations, they don't get suspended simply because of your own failure to provide enough budget for their fulfillment. So if buying more generators, buying more solar is going to cost money, so be it. You can never put a price on the Bill of Rights.
Meanwhile, Eskom has managed to keep the lights on with minimal disruption over the weekend and at the beginning of this week. The power utility said this is as a result of the lower demand due to a lot of people having made the weekend a long weekend. It forecast a difficult winter and the entire year ahead due to a peak in electricity demand.
I need to stress that it is a short-term improvement, and it's not to say that it will be sustainable, as we see with the unreliability that we still experience. So yes, we at all times look at opportunity to reduce the stages of load shedding. We know the impact that that's got on the country and its people is immense, and therefore if we get opportunities where we can reduce load shedding, like we've announced also yesterday afternoon and what we're currently experiencing, we're doing that.
Eskom suspended load shedding on Monday afternoon until 4 p.m. on Tuesday, when stage 2 load shedding will then be implemented. The court case in the North Gauteng High Court continues until Friday. Gloria Sefako-Musi, SABC News, Johannesburg.
We'll see, of course, what comes out of this particular case. But we're seeing some activism, even on the electricity front, which can only be a good thing. Special thanks to all of you, Andrew, Sarah, and Puti, for coming through. Really appreciated it.
Thank you.
And that's the end. That brings us to the end of tonight's show. To join us again tomorrow evening, same time. Have a good night.